Steve, hello? Steve Moore? Steve Moore? Steve, would you join Grover and me over here, please? Steve Moore.
We're back. Ladies and gentlemen, in order to get everybody home and get everything said that needs to be said, who's got the little glasses that go tinkle tinkle? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to go to a very distinguished panel that we have here to talk about the economy, the Trump administration, the Republican House and Senate, where we are, where we're going. And you're going to hear more factual information here than if you've been watching the establishment press over the last several years. So just take notes. Dan Henninger is with us, the deputy editor of the Wall Street Journal editorial page. We have with us Steve Moore, senior economist at Heritage Foundation, who has worked everywhere over his life, and Steve Forbes, who is the owner of Fortune magazine, or Business Week. No, it's the biggest one, Forbes. Okay.
That's going to cost you a fortune.
I knew it was one of those. When President Trump was elected, wasn't president yet, there were predictions by very distinguished economists that things were going to go to Hades. Steve Moore, and then everyone, why did that not happen?
So you said there were predictions?
Predictions by people who had Nobel Prizes that there would be a depression we'd never get back from, Krugman.
Right. So this is a big problem for the left. They're still trying to figure it out because...
Is that mic on? Hold it closer.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Is that better? So Grover's put his finger on something. This is a big, big embarrassing problem for the left. Throughout the Trump campaign, every single liberal prognosticator and economist, from Larry Summers to Paul Krugman to almost the entire Harvard and Yale economics faculty, the Washington Post ran an editorial the week before the election saying, if Donald Trump is elected president, we will have a second Great Depression. And so now, and by the way, the whole idea of the left throughout, Obama gave us the single worst recovery from a recession since the Great Depression. You all know that. I mean, the single worst recovery. The last year he was in office, the economy grew a pathetic 1.6%. The second quarter of this year, as you all know, 4.2%. The third quarter, I don't know how many of you have heard the news for the third quarter. The third quarter ended on October 1st. The latest estimate is another 4% for the third quarter. I mean, amazing number. Now, every one of these said, no, I'm just going to make one last point. I was on CNN last week when we got those latest numbers that we now have the lowest unemployment insurance claims since the Beatles were still playing together. So this woman I was on with, she said, all of this economic good news is the Obama effect. And I agreed with her. I said, yes, this is the effect that Barack Obama is no longer president of the United States. So it's a fantastic story, and it's going to continue. We're going to see at least 2 more years. This one final point. This is just a fun Trump story. When Larry Kudlow and I were working with Trump, and we outlined this kind of economic program for him.
In the campaign?
Yeah, during the campaign. And I'll never forget, Larry said, if you do this, if you cut taxes, if you get the regulations down, if you do the pro-American energy policy, get government off the back of business, do the Steve Forbes agenda, Larry said, we believe we can get you to 3.5% to 4% growth. You know what Trump said? 5, I want 5% growth. And we said, well, that's a stretch, but you know, we're damn near close to 5%. That's amazing.
Dan, you're with the Wall Street Journal. you're out in New York. How does the establishment, press, the financial establishment, they didn't predict this? Did they expect it and didn't want to talk about it? What's your sense? What were they?
The New York financial establishment, I think they knew they had a big problem with the Obama economy for sure. I guess I can get at that indirectly by answering your first question about what happened, other than the Trump panic, as I call it, setting in over the idea that someone completely illegitimate and unacceptable had become president of the United States. But he got elected in November, and by the end of January, a lot of us began to notice that he was appointing people like Kevin Hassett as an economic advisor, and Mick Mulvaney to run OMB, and Jeff Pruitt at EPA. And finally, I'm going to mention Gary Cohn of Goldman Sachs, which people wondered about at the time. I think Cohn worked out pretty darn well because we talked to him soon after he was appointed, and he understood in detail what the Obama administration had done to the U.S. financial system. They had just sort of leaned on its back. And so for those of us who knew all these people, we got pretty darn optimistic about the way things were going to go, and I think in the event, we were right. And I should mention as well that, Congress as well, Hensarling and Brady, Paul Ryan, they knew where the problems lay and immediately set about using the Congressional Review Act to start overturning these regulations. And Steve can talk about this, but boy, the snapback, I think most of us felt if we could get out from under some of this, the U.S. economy would revive. But revive is hardly the word for what we have seen. I don't think anybody on Wall Street would have predicted this kind of result.
Steve Forbes, deregulation, energy changes, personnel, tax cut. What was the biggest thing that was most helpful? Do you have a favorite child here?
Having 5 daughters, I know not to answer that question. And in terms of I think what really did it, Dan touched on it, is the idea that you could get up in the morning and Washington wasn't going to think of new ways to make your life more miserable. They're going to go in the exact opposite direction. And what's amazing is, in deregulation, we all know it's a form of taxation, but it also is something that is unglamorous. You can't even tweet about it. It just is boring stuff. But this administration's followed through on it. And one of the biggest indicators, we've all talked about unemployment and GDP and all that good stuff, is that for almost a generation, new business formations in this country, which is the lifeblood of our future, went to record lows proportionally. Kaufman Foundation, Kansas, done studies on this. One of the things that makes this country extraordinary is that each generation we create 50 to 75 new big companies. Companies you never heard of a few years before rise up. You don't see that in Europe. You don't see that in not much in Asia. But we have this ability to renew ourselves and not rely on companies of the past because they always end up faltering, as we see with, sadly, General Electric today. So you've had this lousy business formation record, which is how you get the big companies of tomorrow. But in the last 2 quarters, it's absolutely reversed. We have record numbers of new business startups in this country. And that is the best testament yet. This is working, not just for now, but also for the future.
Grover, can I add one thing to something?
You can in 1 second. Guys, there's some people in the back who are having separate conversations. Can we hold those? There's going to be a whole hour at the bar after, and I want to make sure everybody here can think while they're talking, and everybody can be heard.
So everyone always reads, you all read Dan Henninger's column every week. It's a must read. And Kim Strassel's, I think Kim is here too. But Dan, I always read your column, and about maybe 3 years ago, you had a column with a brilliant line. There are always these incredible nuggets of wisdom in everything you write. And we recited this at one point on the plane one time. We're going over the economic plan with Trump, and we're trying to synthesize it. And what is this all about? And we stole a line from Dan Henninger, and we said, Donald, you wrote this. Just look at everything Barack Obama did for 8 years and reverse it. And that's what we did. But to the serious point here, I mean, if you think, the reason this is so important is the last 8 years was truly Keynesian economics on steroids, right? I mean, the left threw every possible dingbat idea they had at the recession, right? I mean, we had the $800 billion stimulus plan, we had bailouts, we had tax increases on the rich, we had 3 minimum wage increases, we had $10 trillion of new debt. We had the Fed shovel money into the economy, and that gave us this 1.9% rate of growth. Trump comes in and truly reverses that all. He deregulates where Trump regulated. I mean, where Obama regulated. He cut tax rates where Obama raised them. And the fact that we've got 4% growth now, the real important thing here, I think, folks, is the triumph of our ideas. And by the way, of our ideas at the American Spectator. You guys were supply-siders before it was cool. And this guy right here, it is a triumph of Steve Forbes' ideas, because we took a lot of your ideas when you ran for president in '97.
Steve?
But actually, Bob Bartley was the one who fathered all of this.
Okay. We've had a conversation, lower rates, less regulation on energy, all helpful. What is the one big thing that each of the three of you think would be a very helpful step, whether it's politically possible right now or not? What is the thing that you wish could do next?
Since I've been in politics and therefore never take a question literally,
Okay.
I'll name two. One is resolve these trade disputes, which was good news about what happened with Canada. If you could wave a magic wand and all these disputes were resolved, you'd see the market go up 5,000 points.
Yeah.
Because tariff is another word for sales tax. So let's hope all this works out in the end. Great bargaining and all that. But the other big thing is to get a real huge tax cut. And this is what I worry about. The Republicans are known as the stupid party. They let off with health care, which was a disaster. What they should do, instead of saying we're going to make these tax cuts permanent, because nobody knows they're not permanent, and nothing in this town is permanent anyway, no matter what you say or pass. So go for massive tax cuts, slash the tax rates. Go for a flat tax, and if you can't, do the next best thing, slash rates, slash the capital gains tax, cut a couple of points off of Social Security, even though they'll all gag, let everyone who works earn more, keep more, and the more the Congressional Budget Office objects, the better that bill will be.
Okay. Dan Henninger, same question. What is the thing we haven't gotten to that you think would be most helpful?
Well, let's get a little bit political here. I would say it would be to not only hold the Senate, but increase the number of seats that Republicans have in the Senate, and that means running on what just happened to Jeff Kavanaugh. Because if the Senate doesn't hold, then anything that we propose here is going to be quite pointless. And I got to say, I'm going to just go a little bit off script here and say, as far as Kavanaugh goes, I'm starting to feel, I'm a big fan of Western movies, and I kind of feel we're at the point at the end of a lot of these movies where they say the time for talking is over, let's go out in the street and have it out. So most of the time we don't shoot each other in this city, but what I'm talking about is let's start voting. Voting on the floor of the Senate, and then vote there out in the states for these Senate seats.
Same question to you, Steve Moore. What's the next big thing that ought to be done?
Look, I love what Trump wants to do to save our cities that have been run by Democrats for 100 years. The single most important thing we could do to help Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, low-income Americans, is take the $50 billion a year we waste at the U.S. Department of Education and give 5 million low-income Black and Hispanic kids around the country a real choice where they send their kids to school through a $10,000 vouchers. That's another Steve Forbes idea, right? By the way, that would drive the Democrats crazy, right? Because they keep calling Donald Trump a racist. They say, what are you talking about? I want to give 5 million low-income Black kids a $10,000 voucher. How is that a racist policy, right? I mean, to put it right in their face.
The Republicans did that in D.C. and the Democrats fought it.
Exactly.
Yeah. On this spending, how do we do better? What's the long-term and the short-term strategy to figure out how to keep spending from continuing to grow too much?
Well, one, don't get involved in trench warfare as we did in the 1990s, where you try to do a program by program, you make a little gain, then you lose it. Go for the big stuff. You go for the big stuff, just quickly go down the list. Social Security. We have enough wealth in this country to pay the benefits for those who are about to go on it, but for younger people, people in their teens, 20s, 30s, put in a new system where those taxes go to their own personal accounts, and they own it, not the Washington politicians here. And over time, that takes that problem away. On health care, we have the big unfunded liabilities, more patient control of health care. You do that. You see it with whenever you try a little bit of a free enterprise in health care, free markets, by golly, it works. You get more health care at less cost. LASIK surgery for the eyes, 15 years ago, cost $2,200 an eye. These are nominal dollars. Today it's $1,300 with a better result. That's what happens when you get, the problem with health care, it's all third party. And we've got to get patient control, and there are positive ways to do it, and the Republicans should be doing it. And one final example on that, Surgery Center of Oklahoma, hospital, great surgery, board-certified surgeons. They take no insurance. It's all cash. Their prices are so low that Oklahoma state workers often go there because even though the state sends them there, even though they don't get reimbursed by insurance, it ends up still being cheaper than going to the regular hospital. One little example on that, Grover. A sophisticated form of a hernia, you get very bad, hospital will charge $17,000 for it. They charge $3,975, and they list all the prices, and more hospitals are getting the idea, why don't we push warranties on results? Hey, but free market, and that liability goes away. And for defense, which the other side hates, we'll give them, how about reforming procurement, which employs now 500,000 people, and reform that, and you'll have more resources for real defense instead of bureaucracy building.
Dan, spending.
Well, on spending, I guess I would essentially agree with the two Steves have said. Reforming Social Security, Medicare, entitlements, I think the first thing is, as I just said, you need control of Congress to do that. That may or may not happen in November. But just as a thought, I've become more and more basically concerned that big, comprehensive legislation is basically becoming impossible to pass in Washington. That it just doesn't, there's just too many elements in play. The media, too many members of Congress are looking more at the numbers of, as Bob was suggesting earlier, the number of tweets that they're getting in their office every day. They get pushed around by that. I think we have to find a way to do some of these reforms incrementally in smaller pieces, which in fact is the way the Democrats did it for about 20 years. They found ways to get things into legislation that became permanent, that moved the ratchet in their direction. I think maybe that's a strategy that we're going to have to adopt in the future, rather than trying to do these big reforms all in a single piece of legislation.
And by the way, a way to avoid what happened to Nixon and to George W. Bush, ultimately, that'll have to be done in one fell swoop. I think the Fed is sort of doing it now. Return to Alexander Hamilton's gold standard. No more fooling around with the value of the dollar.
We've been talking about Congress, the president, federal government. There are other players, state governors, state legislators, and the judiciary. The Janus case, the Supreme Court case that was recently decided that said that government workers don't have to pay union dues or something like union dues. That alone, of the 5 million people covered by Janus, 5% of them had already opted out of the unions. That's $250 million a year today, lost to organized labor if no one else walked out the door. And if we follow what happened in Wisconsin, 20 or 30% may walk out the door. You could end up with $1 to $2 billion a year lost to the left from that one Supreme Court case. So my question is, how do you see the courts' support for property rights, less regulation? How important is that? What issues do you look at? And also at the state level, the 50 or 57 states, what are they doing that the feds can't do themselves?
Well, let me start. I'm going to add another thing to what you talked about, because obviously the right to work was huge. But something else that is extremely underappreciated in our tax bill, other than we got drilling in Alaska for the first time in 30 years. How great was that? But one of the things I insisted on in terms of broadening the tax base was eliminating the state and local tax deduction. Now, if you're for small government, that is an enormous change, because now it says, Grover, if you want $1 of government services in Manhattan, you're going to have to go to your taxpayers and raise $1, not 70 cents. Now, a lot of my wealthy friends in Manhattan, Dan, frankly, aren't too happy about this. They've said, my gosh, you know, my taxes are going up because of this tax bill. And you know what I said to them? Move to Texas or Florida if you want your taxes to go down, where they have no income tax. But this is going to, I think, cause huge changes at the state and local level. My friend Lisa Nelson, where's Lisa? I know she's here somewhere, has been so big on this at ALEC. If you want to return power to the states, get rid of the state and local tax deduction and require states to show their citizens they're getting their money's worth, which, by the way, they are not. And by the way, 5 states that are screwed by this: New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, my home state of Illinois, and California. Sorry.
Go ahead, Dan.
Well, some of us, unfortunately, are kind of entrenched in states like New York, New York City.
We appreciate your sacrifice.
Thank you. I can add it up for you after dinner. It's funny, it almost seems laughable to say, I agree that we have to devolve. I mean, I think it's imperative that we devolve more authority and power back to the states. But I was going to say laughable because I was riding the Acela into town yesterday, and I looked up as we were pulling into Union Station over to my left, and I said, my God, look at all those condominiums that are going up here on the edge of Union Station. I mean, the building boom taking place in Washington is extraordinary, and it's not for the biological research going on here, is it? It's a boom town. Government is big business, and I'm afraid that it's bipartisan big business. And it's just not going to stop unless more Republicans understand that Washington will run the country unless more authority is sent back to the states. And I think the states, I think we just, Kim Strassel was telling me ALEC just had its big dinner here last week. They filled the room. Yeah. And ALEC has done such fantastically good work in innovating extraordinary solutions to these sorts of problems at the state level. And so some of us are going to keep basically promoting that idea.
Yeah.
And one place to start on that kind of devolution is Medicaid. Most expensive, worst program of health insurance in the Western world. Massive amounts of money, very little to show for it. You allow the states to have real flexibility, you'll start to see real reform. That's how we got welfare reform. A state like Wisconsin does it. And by golly, one example is Indiana, where Bob started. Indiana, they have done health savings accounts for state workers. voluntary. It has worked in curbing costs and giving people more control. They're now starting to do it on Medicaid. And amazingly, I was there the other day, not one other state is trying to do this basic fundamental kind of reform. Let patients control the money, and by golly, a lot of problems will be solved, and they will be better off.
One of the advantages that those of us in the free market center right have is that our ideas succeed. So if we get one of the states to do something that makes sense, school choice, limiting property taxes, cutting the income taxes, going to 0% on the income tax, Florida, Texas, other states can see the success and mimic it. The other team can't put government-run healthcare single payer in Vermont and then have everybody look at it because they'd see failure. So the left can only succeed in Washington to take truly stupid ideas have to be national. Good ideas can come up at the state level, and I think that gives us an advantage because we have 50 states to work in. Get a good idea passed in any one of them, and you can begin to share it state by state. Term limits, welfare reform, income tax cuts. We've seen these happen again and again, legalizing Uber and Lyft and Airbnb, and those successes move sideways and then up to Washington. Guys, we're going to move to introducing Wlady. Give us a minute on whatever I forgot to ask you about that everybody needs to be aware of. Steve?
I'll just tell you one quick story that you're going to love, Grover, because you're one of the captains of the supply side revolution. Back in January of 2016, we go in to see Donald Trump, Larry and I, and we have this chart that we got from ATR about how the federal, U.S. tax rate is 40% on companies, and the rest of the world's at 20%. It's a great, and Trump looks, and Larry says to, we called him Donald back then, said, Donald, that's why we believe you should call for a 20% corporate tax rate. And Trump thinks about it for a minute, he sits back and says, no, I'm not going to do that. We're like, Donald, don't you get it? We're up here at 40, and they're at 20. This is a 20% Head Start program for every country we compete with. He says, no, not 20. I want 15. 15. Now, this is a great story. So from that day until December 20, 2017, every speech Donald Trump gave, every public declaration, every private meeting is in with members of Congress, 15, 15, you know this, 15. He never deviated from that number. We're sitting in the White House on December 20th when Mitch McConnell comes in, because you all know we had to get 50 Republicans to vote for that bill. McConnell comes in and he says, Mr. President, I'm so sorry I failed you. I know, we did everything we could. We just had our caucus meeting. I made every argument I possibly could. I couldn't get you a 15% corporate tax rate. Would you take 20? He said, yeah, sold, I'll take it. Now, why is that an important story? This guy knows the art of the deal. He is a master negotiator. And to the day I die, Grover, I will submit to you that Donald Trump all along knew he wanted 20%. But he started at 15, and if he had started at 20, there's no doubt in my mind we would end up at 25%. Thank you, Donald Trump, for getting us to the lowest corporate tax rate in 50 years.
Steve Forbes.
To sell these things, I hope we learn to label them right. One of the things that hurt last year on the tax fight was calling it tax reform. Tax reform tells people nothing. Tax cuts, people get it. So let's banish the word reform and get directly to the point. You keep more, you earn more, we want you to be richer. And from Donald Trump, that has some credibility.
Yeah.
I'll just make one quick final remark, which is that, look, in about 3 or so weeks, we're going to have the midterm elections. And I'm going to go out on a limb here. I wouldn't have said this a month ago, but I would think now what's going to happen here is we're going to have a rerun of the 2016 election. And what I mean by that is what has been happening here with Jeff Kavanaugh, I think, is arguably if not one of the most defining of political events of our generation. It's bigger than Jeff Kavanaugh, and it's bigger than Donald Trump. A lot of people voted in 2016 not for Donald Trump, but mainly for what was going to happen to the Supreme Court. And I think that is sinking in again, that this is a big vote, and you're beginning to see it in some of the polling. Kramer has pulled out about 10 points ahead of Heidi Heitkamp. The Menendez-Hubert race is now a dead heat. Something's going on out there in the country. And we could be in for a long night that first Tuesday in November, but I think people are recognizing what the stakes are bigger than just a midterm election.
Okay. Guys, thank you very, very much. Thank the panel, please. Thank you very much. Very good, very helpful. Look, there's a reason the other team is so grumpy, okay? They're taking real blows, they know it, they see it, and they're grumpy. I'm gonna ask Wlady to come up. Everybody knows Wlady's leadership as a great editor, a great writer, a serious public intellectual. So many of the people in this room and around the country in the center-right movement got their start writing seriously, and learning how to write better from Wlady.
Thank you, Grover.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grover. And I should mention that I miss having Grover as one of our writers. Back in the good old Clinton era, he contributed every month with terrific column. And he predicted, I think, even before the first Clinton inauguration, that we are in for a long Clinton dynasty. I guess, Grover always understated the problems we faced. Okay. Now, back in our Bloomington days, one of the best things about being there was being close to the great and always quotable Indiana basketball coach, Bob Knight. Whenever he faced fake news, he knew what to say, telling the pressies, quote, "All of us learn to write in the second grade. Most of us go on to greater things." We really weren't surprised to see Coach Knight campaigning alongside Donald Trump in 2016, though it might interest Robert Mueller to know that Knight some years ago traveled to Russia to do some fishing with Ted Williams. Let's leave that for another evening. What I'd like to do is return to the subject of writers and writing and moving on past second grade. Much as I know Coach Knight didn't always agree with every call, I have to insist that those brave and hardy and talented souls who write for us were just getting started back in second grade, and that they've gone on to do lots of great things for us and helped save writing and reporting from some very bad scribblers. As someone who has had the pleasure of working with our writers since 1980, I've learned there really aren't enough words in the OED, that's the Oxford English Dictionary, for expressing the thanks they deserve for all that they've done for us over the years and continue to do day after day after day. I'd like to name them all, and thank you, Melissa, for recognizing them earlier tonight, those who are in the room. I terribly miss those who are no longer with us, such as longtime contributors and great friends Joe Shatton, Bill Tucker, and Florence King. I always miss Vic Gold, who died last year. We lost our president, Don Reich, a wonderful writer, by the way, when he could take the time to pen a piece, such as his delightful profile last year of talk show radio star Chris Plant. And just a few months ago, we lost the ever-engaging Tom Cragwell. He was only 61. We are lucky to have so many top-notch regulars: Dave Catron, Jed Babin, Jeff Lord, Scott McKay, Deborah Saunders, Bill Murchison, Gilbert Sewell, Betsy McCoy, John Wolstetter, Don Devine, and the great Roger Kaplan. And I'm so happy that George Perry has joined their ranks. I am also grateful to the Heartland Institute, the Middle East Forum, the Chaim Solomon Center, and Hillsdale College for all the expert copy they bring our way. Thanks also to the R Street Institute. And thanks to them, we are able to post not only the finest American saloon series, Riding in the Land, special recognition there goes to Kevin Kosar, but also Stephen Greenhut's weekly California Watch column, the best coverage I know of about what one-party rule looks and smells like. And to the Koch Foundation, a special note of gratitude for helping us cover a particularly irksome problem, crony capitalism and the open scandal of big government and big business partnership. We are grateful for the help we've received in bringing on full-time the talents of Daniel Flynn and George Neumeier. I am also indebted to our senior editor, Frank Buckley, for all the good writing he has directed our way. This includes the excellent work of now frequent contributor Brandon Weichert, who is here with us tonight. I wish another new mainstay of our site, Rabbi Dov Fisher, were here tonight as well. But today was the Jewish holiday Simchat Torah. Next year we'll get it right. And also hope that the one and only Ben Stein rejoins us. Special thanks finally to Dr. Paul Kanger of Grove City College. Not only for the steady stream of sharp and timely essays that he contributes to our pages, but for guiding his students in our direction. Last summer's group of interns, led by three, I believe, Grove City attenders, were our most impressive yet. And it was a special treat to be able to publish these young talents in our pages. Two of our interns from 2 years ago have hit the ground running. A special salute to Andrew Ager, now a young political reporter at the Weekly Standard, and to Brianna Noble, who was recently hired as business reporter by the Detroit News. This year we are proud to recognize Brianna as the recipient of our Young Writer Award. Unfortunately, I can't introduce her to you because because tonight she's in Detroit. Not a fate we wish on most people. Okay, when they interned for us, both Andrew and Brianna were students at Hillsdale College. With every year, the indispensability of schools like Hillsdale and Grove City becomes more pronounced. How long before chapters of these colleges open up in other states from coast to coast? Now, it's said that our country is divided as never before. That's what happens when one side of the divide can't tolerate even having an opposition. For 51 plus years, we've been part of that opposition, and from all indications, our work is only just beginning. But they're the ones back in second grade, headed back toward kindergarten and then preschool. Greatness will lie in the opposite direction. Thanks to our people, our writers, our friends, that's where we want to be headed. Thank you very much.
Wlady, thank you. Look, the Democrats never minded opposition in the sense that the Harlem Globetrotters never minded the Washington Generals. What they objected to was an opposition that actually was trying with some success. That's what set them off. That's when the division came about, when we objected to where they wanted to go instead of tagged along after them. I want to ask Brad Todd to come up for an introduction and an award. Brad Todd is a Republican strategist and activist and successful campaign person. What I find most interesting, and you've probably heard this statement, he originated it, that explaining the 2016 election. He said, the journalists take Donald Trump literally, but not seriously, while voters take him seriously, but not literally. And that explains how America and the establishment could hear Donald Trump say the exactly same thing, and these guys just never understood what he meant, And this group got exactly what he meant. Maybe not what Webster would have said he meant, but they knew exactly what he meant. And they were for that, not the other thing. Brad. Yeah, sorry, didn't see you. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for having me. The book on your table, I had the pleasure of writing with our honoree tonight, Salena Zito, last year. And when we first took this concept to the publishers in New York, there was a lot of skepticism about a dual author concept. We're both first-time authors. Apparently those don't work very well. And so I get asked all the time, said, how did the dual author concept work? And I was like, well, my advice to you is you should write a book with Salena Zito. And it works out pretty good if you do that. I was trained as a young man in journalism and in some ideals. I consider myself a refugee from journalism now. It's okay. It's a recovery program. You can get through it. You know, journalists talk a lot about courage. There's a lot of talk about courage in journalism right now, and journalistic ideals talk a lot about shedding light. Tonight's honoree, Salena, my friend, has ample courage, and courage that we hear discussed in journalism a lot. It's not quite perhaps what you'd think. Her courage, though, is so strong that it enables her to shine light, another ideal of the profession. In 2016, she had the courage to not follow the pack, to go out and look and see what was happening and to reject the conventional wisdom in American journalism and in American political thought. There might be nothing in politics that it takes more courage to do than to reject conventional wisdom. It was about this time 2 years ago, late September, early October, when Salena took a trip out the Lincoln Highway. And you know, before we had interstates, we had numbered highways. Before we had numbered highways, we had named highways. So she came up with this idea, and she convinced the New York Post to let her do it, to travel the Lincoln Highway from Pennsylvania to Cheyenne, Wyoming. She got through that trip about this time, October the 2nd or 3rd, somewhere in there. She called me and she said, he's gonna win. I said, what? And now, granted, at the time I was making advertisements for the National Rifle Association, trying every day to help make him win. And she called me and she said, he's gonna win. And I was like, you have been up too long and driving too long. I'm not quite there yet that we're gonna make it. She says, no, he's gonna win. I'm gonna write it in the New York Post. So it happened. She broke with conventional wisdom to do it. And if you wanna know how much courage she had to do that, at the time, Salena had no permanent job. Her newspaper had begun a process of devolution, and she had taken a reduction in force package on September the 19th, 2016. So I want you to imagine what it would be like to take in your chosen profession, do the right and say that something is true that everyone in the profession believes is not true at a time when your own future is not secured. But that's Salena's courage. Courage isn't enough, though. You have to have vision. And for a journalist, vision doesn't just begin with one's eyes, it begins with one's ears. And I have spent a lot of time with Salena traveling around the Rust Belt. If you read this book, we go to 10 counties that flipped from Obama to Trump, and in profile 7 archetypes of voters who did so. And Salena Zito is the best listener I've ever met. I will tell you one story, and then I will let you hear from her. We were in a coffee shop in a blue-collar town in Ohio, in a county that today has the same population as it did in 1970. The coffee shop was bustling. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning. The county has not voted for Republicans since 1984, to my recollection. There's a long line. I decide I have to go to the restroom. I come back. By the time I come back, the owner has stopped slinging coffee beans over her shoulder behind the bar, stopped pouring coffee for the dozen or so customers in line, and she's leaning over the counter talking to Salena. And she's crying. She's telling Salena about how she and her husband moved from New York out here to the Midwest to start this coffee shop. He'd gotten terminally ill and died and left her running this coffee shop after all their dreams were different. They'd had the courage to start this business. So in the middle of this busy day, while I'm 2 minutes in the restroom, Salena not only breaks into conversation with a total stranger, but has her telling her about her most vulnerable moment in her life. That's the kind of listener Salena is. And that is why she was the person that got the election right in 2016, and so many other people missed it. And yes, give her a round of applause. And in many ways, our polity is mired, I think, in a trench warfare right now. And trench warfare can often be a very dark place. But Salena's ears and her eyes, I think, will shed a whole lot of light in what has been a dark place for America. So I'd like to congratulate her. Invite her up.
Believe it or not, we didn't fight once when we wrote the whole book. That is a testament to Brad Todd. Hi, I'm Salena Zito. I'm from Pittsburgh. I think there's some Grove City Ginzers in the, there we go. I am a reporter and columnist for the Washington Examiner. I am also a columnist for the New York Post. I'm a contributor for CNN. I have my own radio show on Sirius XM POTUS channel. I wrote a book with Brad Todd, and I taught a program at Harvard called the Main Street Project. And I'm incredibly honored this evening to win this award. I just want to tell you a little bit about how I approach journalism. So, even though I cover Washington, I never really come here. No offense, but I get hives when I get about to Connecticut Avenue. It's not pretty. I began as a reporter for the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, which was owned by Richard Mellon-Scaife. I worked there. He loved you. I loved my job. It was a great job. I started as a columnist, and for the first 4 or 5 months, I sat at my desk and wrote columns, and then I was like, well, this is boring. I mean, who cares what I think? So I had a talk with my boss, and I said, look, I want to go out and interview people, and I want to talk to people. It was coming up on the 2006 midterms, and I understood something different was happening. I wasn't quite sure what it was. I remember going to an American Legion in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, where Melissa Hart was the congresswoman, a Republican. And she was beloved there. I expected it to be filled for her. Instead, it was filled for a Democrat. And I understood something a little bit different was happening, that voters were unhappy with the status quo in Washington. And they were willing to vote for someone different. And even though Jason Altmaier had a D after his name, he was pro-life, he was pro-gun, he was fiscally conservative, and he was pro-military. So what they were telling Washington was, we want someone who actually sticks to what they say they are. And that was the 2006 midterms. I remember talking to Republicans that were running the voter vault. Does anybody remember voter vault? Yeah, and they kept telling me, oh, our voters are gonna show up. And I kept saying, oh yeah, they are, but they're not showing up for you. In 2008 or 2010, I understood another swing election wave cycle was coming. I went out to all the different counties and with Brad's help and identified and understood why people were moving away from Democrats. Just 2 years after they believed that they had a dynasty for the next 40 years. Why? Because Washington misread their vote in 2008. They didn't understand what they were telling them. And between 2006 and 2010, I understood a populist movement was happening, but I didn't know where it was going. But I knew people were willing to move away from the political parties. By August of 2015, when Donald Trump came down the elevator, I didn't think he was gonna win. But after I listened to people, not people from Washington, after I moved away from Twitter, after I moved away from Facebook, and I listened to people outside of Washington, I understood something, again, different was happening. I didn't really believe he was going to win until after the Iowa caucuses, because I looked at those voter totals and I looked who showed up to vote for him, and the willingness for the evangelical voter to get behind him told me, again, something different was happening. By July of 2016, right before my trip across the country, I took a trip across Pennsylvania, all 67 counties. Now the thing about Pennsylvania is that every year pundits and reporters will say, Pennsylvania went blue. It's voted for a Democrat again. And they really didn't take a look at what was happening other than that result. Well, what I knew before I drove across Pennsylvania was Pennsylvania had become 0.4 more Republican every 4 years. So in 1996, Bill Clinton had won 28 of our 67 counties. By 2012, Barack Obama had only won 13 of them. We had moved away that far apart, but people weren't paying attention to that erosion. So I drove around the state. I identified 10 counties that Mitt Romney was unable to inspire voters to show up for him. And I understood if only 2,000 more people did show up in those 10 counties, then it was over. It didn't matter who showed up in Philadelphia for Hillary Clinton. It didn't matter what her numbers were, if they were exceeded his or they were the same as Obama's. If he was able to just turn 2,000 more voters out in those 10 counties, he was going to win by about 40,000 votes, which is just about what he won by. How did I know that? Because I listened to those voters. I understood that they were willing to move away from the Democratic Party and or show up. And it was during that time that I started to notice different archetypes of voters. But because of the flurry and the intensity of covering political campaigns, I didn't have time to focus on who exactly those voters were. But not only did I understand by interviewing people, but also because of the signs. Now, did anybody travel 15 minutes outside of any city during the election? Okay. Did you see the signs? Okay. They weren't just the kind of, boilerplate signs that you get at the campaign office, right? Or that you buy on Amazon. These were homemade signs. That tells you a completely different intensity. And Brad used to always tell me, campaign signs don't vote. I'm like, okay, they don't. But people painted the size. Did anybody see any houses painted with Trump on? I sure did. How about the barns? I know you saw it out there in Grove City. I saw a horse painted with Trump on the side. I kid you not. I have a picture of it. Now, when I came home, I wrote the story. I said, here are the 10 counties that Trump needs to win Pennsylvania. And if he wins Pennsylvania, that means North Carolina, Florida, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, and Iowa are gone. Why? Because Pennsylvania's 5 points more Democratic than those states. And then I went to all those states. And then I drove across the Lincoln Highway, and I knew it was over. Comey didn't matter, Russians didn't matter, and people get insulted when you say that to them because they say, I made my mind up a long time ago. It has nothing to do with Comey. It had nothing to do with Russia. It has to do with my community. It has to do with localism. So, an election, as Brad said, I lost my job on September 19th because of a buyout situation. From September 19th until November of 2016, I worked for 4 different publications, writing 4 different stories every day until Election Day. And trust me, I didn't make much money. But I wanted to finish that election out. And when I wrote that piece in the New York Post, you can't even imagine what the harassment I took on Twitter. But it wasn't pretty. But I don't have a stake in this election. It was my job to tell you what was happening. I don't take planes. I don't fly, much to Brad's chagrin. I always take the back roads. I don't stay in a hotel. I always stay in a bed and breakfast because the first person I meet is a small business owner, and they know where all the bodies are buried. I go to church with these people. I go to the gun range. I go to the fall festivals. I become part of the community, and I listen to them. And I think that's why I understood. If I went to a rally for Donald Trump in 2016, I would almost always get there 2 days ahead of time. I got to know that community, and I got to know what was important to them. I would go to the rally. I would get there 4 or 5 hours before they started. Anybody here go to a Trump rally? It's like a tailgate party, okay? It is like a freaking tailgate party. But other reporters, because of the constraints of the way that news organizations are structured, they would arrive 20 minutes before the event started. They landed at the airport. They dropped their bags off at the Marriott. They took the bus together, and we were all in the same cage together. But because of the constraints of time, they would pick out 3 of the weirdest people there, and trust me, there was a certain percentage of oddities there. And you without fail, you could watch a package on every channel, and all those same 3 weird people were there. And then they would pick out like 7 of the most ridiculous quotes that Trump would say, missing all those economic and aspirational things that he talked about for the 2 hours that he would talk. So I understood they weren't angry. These voters were very aspirational. I understood that Make America Great Again was about bringing people together. People in this country, it's in our DNA. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves. On election night 2016, I interviewed Mike Pence on the tarmac in Pittsburgh, and I went home and cried because I knew that I interviewed the next Vice President of the United States, but I didn't have a job. The next day, I covered, for the last time for the New York Post, I went and covered election night in Pennsylvania. I showed up, and there was all this celebrity journalists, and there was me. And they're all looking at Philadelphia, and I'm looking at my 10 counties in Pennsylvania. And by about 8:47, I knew the race was over. I knew Pennsylvania was over, which meant all those other states were gone. The next morning, I woke up, and I cried again. There's one more crying in this story, just so you know. I cried again, because I realized I was 57 years old, and I was not that different from a lot of Trump voters. I didn't have a job. I was 57 years old. My industry was dying. I would probably have to work 2 jobs, and nobody wanted me anymore. And I knew how a lot of voters felt. I was walking to the bakery next door to my house. It's a French. Apparently, I thought, because I'm Italian and I can make dough, that I could also make croissants. They had a sign up that said that they were hiring. I'm like, well, I guess this is my next career. So I was walking to the bakery, and the phone rings, and it's CNN. And they're like, hey, can you be on CNN today? And immediately I thought I did something wrong, because I'm Catholic, that's what I do. And so they said, I'm like, what are we going to be talking about? And they're like, oh, it's you. You're the only reporter that actually stuck to their guns and understood that he was going to win. And then I cried again, because they hired me that moment. Here's why The Great Revolt, the book, is so important, and why the type of journalism that I do is so important, because it goes into the communities and it listens to people. The Great Revolt is the only book about the people that put the president in office. It's not a Republican book, it's not a Democratic book, but these people's lives come to life, and you understand why they voted for him. But you also understand the different archetypes that are so important to this coalition. Brad and I went into this book wondering if this election was a fluke or if it was a new populist conservative coalition. We decided at the end of the book that it is a new populist conservative coalition. I hope you guys read it. There's a lot to learn from it, and thank you so much for this award. Thank you.
Salena. Brad, thank you. Salena, congratulations. Salena, we have been so good on time, and I was so delighted that you took the time that you did, because that was an amazing, amazing explanation of where we are and how we got here. And the people who really need to hear it aren't here, and that's why we're going to beat them in the next election. Please don't tell that to anybody you know at CNN. It'll only cost us. I want to thank the panelists, Steve, Dan, all the sponsors and the attendees, and now the Honor Guard. Please don't leave. The Honor Guard will now retire, and please stand and salute the flag as it exits. Assemble, march. Right, face. Shoulder, arm. Forward, march. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, directly behind you there is a reception. The bar is open. Thank you for joining us on behalf of the American Spectator and Bob Tyrrell.